My name is Rebecca Weston, and I'm a clinician in private practice in Missoula, Montana.
All right. Now, you and I, Rebecca, were talking about this Me Too movement that has come about that just almost literally came out of nowhere. I don't think anybody saw it coming. And, and when the trickles became a flood, I know that that was one of the reasons why we reached out to each other, because of the kind of work that you do. So could you share with me a little bit about yourself and the kind of work you do?
Sure. I am a clinician in private practice, and in that capacity, I work a great deal with survivors of sexual abuse and sexual assault. Until quite recently, I was also employed by a psychotherapist at First Step Resource Center, where I helped put together and conceptualize the mental health program at First Step to help families who are dealing with these issues in their world. And so it's an issue that I care a great deal about, and I was as surprised as anybody else to see the Me Too movement emerge, and we don't always predict these things. And so when they do happen, we try as best as we can to sort of catch up and understand the implications and build on them in the most productive way possible.
Rebecca, from your perspective as a clinician, you work with folks all the time. How good is it that this is happening, and especially in such a public way?
I think overall, I think it's an extraordinarily good thing. In my line of work, what I see with the women I work with is that silence and secrecy is the norm, and that it's the silence and secrecy that make people struggle in private and makes it very hard for them to access help, and it also makes it very hard for the community to know how ubiquitous these kinds of situations are. It happens in any population. It happens among families that we would not expect it in terms of the normal stereotypes. It happens in churches. It happens in schools. It happens on basketball teams. It happens in so many different places. And because it's so secret, there's a lot of shame that ends up emerging. And then that's the last thing in the world that survivors need, is that feeling of shame. And so I think the most extraordinary thing about this is encapsulated actually in the language of Me Too. It's happened to me too. And it helps break down the stereotypes of what so-called victims look like and what perpetrators look like. And I think that that's extraordinary for women and for men, actually.
Talk to me, Rebecca, about empowerment and how scary it is sometimes to come forward.
Oh, I think that the fear that people have in coming forward is so extraordinary, and I think that fear is both specific to the nature of the assaults that happen. They're very intimate, and as a culture, we are scared to talk about such things, and we certainly don't have unified ways of talking about bodies and sex, and so it taps into very profound cultural differences about how to think and talk and feel about those things. And so we don't have cultural maps to make it feel normal and okay to talk about that. And so for women, in addition to that, they also, as so many of these stories have indicated, they also have tremendous fears about the consequences of sharing the information. And those consequences can be tremendously personal in terms of their family not believing them, or it could become broader in terms of their economic context. If they speak up, will they get fired? If they speak up, will they be believed? If they speak up, will they be blamed? And so both the culture and then people's individual family and economic and professional situations really make it very, very hard to do that. And so I think the concept of empowerment, what this can do, is it can say, you know what, it actually doesn't happen to individuals when it's not their fault that it happens. It's a cultural problem, and it needs cultural solutions, and it needs solutions that make it safe in the workplace to speak out. It needs solutions in families to find ways to communicate about uncomfortable things, and to share uncomfortable realities. And when it becomes clear that it's so pervasive, I think people feel a little bit less afraid to name it. And that to me is what empowerment is. And I'll go on just in my personal work with clients, it's a hard journey to start naming those things, but I have never met one client who regretted it, and who in some ways look back on that and literally say, it was awful that it happened, but I'm an amazingly stronger person now that I can see it and what I understand about myself and the world. And that's the power. That's empowerment to me. And that's what this moment can help.
So let me ask you this one thing, and then we'll wrap it up. If
Okay.
there's somebody out there listening to this right now that has gone through this, but is still, either afraid or hesitant or is thinking, oh, it wasn't that big a deal or whatever, what would you say to them?
I would say perhaps the best thing is to reach out to their most trusted friend, and then reach out to First Step Resource Center or the YWCA. And those places are exceptionally open to hearing a full range of what people want to do. They don't demand reporting. They don't demand complete clarity about what the next step is from the person. They offer a really broad and open space to think through what they might want to do. And there's nothing more important than that. I don't think people like to feel railroaded into any one choice about how to handle it. I think they just want a little bit of room to hear what their options are. And so I would call First Step Resource Center, and I would call the YWCA.
And also,
or SARC on campus.
Sure.
Actually, Student Advocacy Resource Center on campus.
And for the men who are accused, there has to be the proper legal process too, right?
I believe so, absolutely. And that's actually one of the things that I think is emerging that I have some concerns about. And I think that right now they're small C concerns and not big C concerns, but nevertheless real concerns. I don't believe. I do strongly believe in due process. Absolutely. I think women have everything to gain by due process measures. And I think that what we want is to build in due process for women to be able to speak forward and then for men to understand what's being alleged. And I can imagine that in, for example, contracts and unions. I can imagine that in all sorts of places. But I do believe in due process. And I guess the last thing I would say is, and this came out at a panel that we were talking about, is that this is really opening up a language about what do we mean by masculinity. And I happen to believe that this is culturally trained behavior in men. I don't think it's inherent at all. I think men are just as capable of tremendous love and affection and intimacy that does not include violence. And so I think this is also an opportunity to really re-examine what are the norms that we teach in our society. How safe do we make it for men to step up and say, I don't believe in this, without them feeling shamed? What space do we give for men to say, I don't like that kind of macho stuff either. It doesn't stand for me either. How do we allow men to do that? And that's why I think this is tremendously empowering, both for men and for women, to open up conversations and broaden the possibilities for men and women.